Hi, I'm Matthew Wong, a research analyst at CB Insights.
And I'm Anand Sanwal, CEO and co-founder of CB Insights. Today we're going to talk to you about how to use data to tell a compelling story.
So typically we start with a hypothesis. That might come from a trend that we see in the industry, and if we want to see if that data bears out. So for example, we might see first angel investment in an industry like Bitcoin or blockchain, and put together a brief showing that there's more actually investors than startups in that industry. Fast forward 3 years later, and we've seen over $1 billion to startups in that category. So if a big deal happens, we want to ask if there's more going on there, and certainly do that with data.
And once we have a hypothesis, it's really a matter of finding the right signals to test that idea. So our goal is not to be pundits. What pundits typically do is they find 2 or 3 anecdotal data points, what we call anecdata, and then they extrapolate that into a story. It sometimes leads to a good narrative, but it's dangerous because most often it's wrong. So when it comes to industry forecasting, what we're trying to do is take a look at data-driven leading indicators, and we look at data points that range from comments on Reddit to niche gaming communities and what people are talking about in the media. We determine if companies are developing IP and filing patents in an industry. As Matt mentioned, we look at whether angels are investing in a space. It's a very different animal than the pundit world, where the model seems to be take a really small number of data points, get together over beer and pizza, and make it up. On a company forecasting level, we start out looking at financial data, so things like funding, M&A, exits, as well as different news and signals like performance metrics like web traffic, mobile app data, Twitter, Facebook, etc. And to some degree, what we're really doing is replicating the process that a human analyst would use. The main difference is we're doing it at scale. So an analyst might be able to go through 20 companies a day. We can go through 20,000 or 200,000.
So the more data points you can choose from, the better the understanding is going to be. For example, food delivery was a big trend that we saw in tech last year, and we did a lot of data-driven analysis around that market. As time passed and more companies entered the space, it was clear that a lot of companies were doing very similar things. So we tracked a lot of data points, such as how many people were talking about a specific startup, what the news sentiment was around them. And using those signals in a predictive manner, we knew that a certain company was going to fold, and a few months later, the company actually did.
After you've got your data, it's a matter of testing and contextualizing those signals. So there's nuance underneath these signals that you can find through tests and iterations. So as an example, we use job board data as a useful tool to understand the growth of a company, but you need to know how to use it. So for example, Lyft might be bringing on a lot of people, and the job board indicates lots of hiring activity, but how does it compare to somebody like Uber? That relative measure is really important. Then you need to look at what positions they're hiring for. So if we're hiring for a VP of sales every 3 months, that's actually a job posting, which might be a good signal, but in this case, it's a negative signal because nobody should be looking for a new VP of sales that often. And by backtesting, what we're able to do is weigh the relative value of the data points that we're capturing. So the ability to put a value before each of these variables to give each one a weighted importance is often what truly drives the model and lets us distinguish between companies in different industries. And so once we've selected the data that's most relevant to a company or to an industry, we need to put those findings into some easily digestible format. And there's a number of different methods we use for that. We want to be accessible to a wide-reaching and diverse readership, so it's not just aimed at data analysts or tech VCs. Our key learning over time is that graphics work. It's not breaking news, but we can have a long narrative and say, here's the ascent of this company in 10 charts, and that really works. Our goal with the charts alone is to let you understand that ascent without even having to read necessarily the narrative.
So we have a lot of different formats for conveying different kinds of information. So for each dimension that we want to compare a company on, for example, there will be a weapon of choice. A lot of times we'll start by putting together a market landscape, which helps understanding what's going on in a certain industry. Typically the way we compile a market map will be using data to look at all the companies in that industry, and then visually we'll take the logos of those companies and break them up into different categories. So just sets the table, this is an industry that we're talking about, and this is where the certain company fits into that industry. From there it varies. The valuation might be a more traditional bar chart. If we're comparing company valuations, and it will look more like you're stacking 2 players up against each other, maybe like fantasy football, for example. Exits in a space might be depicted with a scatter plot graph. So we have a few themes that have worked well for us. One would be our periodic table, which we know work and people like. And then we'll sometimes also integrate different visualizations from our database, such as a product we have called the Business Social Graph.
when it comes to depicting data, honesty is crucial. People play lots of games with data, and it's possible to actually manipulate data to make a point. So you can do things where the y-axis doesn't start at 0, or you can introduce irrelevant information to try to convey a viewpoint. For us, at the end of the day, our credibility as a company is built on not just having good data, but not taking liberties with it that ultimately would be bad for business.
So a big part of that is recognizing that your intuition or your predictions can be wrong.
I think our sort of fundamental premise is that corporate decisions today rely on lots of gut instinct, Google searches, and guys with MBAs. So these are decisions about what markets to get into, what companies to acquire, what are your competitors doing, and people are making them without any real data-driven kind of viewpoint, which is pretty shocking. I think a famous example of this was in 1999. There was a famous management consulting case where they went into AT&T and told them that the size of the cell phone market would not exceed 900,000. So, that recommendation obviously leads to lots of follow-on actions, and so that led to a lot of execution that obviously proved to be very wrong. So understanding an industry needs to be a lot more rigorous than it has happened today, because people make major decisions about what to do based on those recommendations.
So ultimately, we're working on problems that machines are just better suited for, and we still believe in humans, obviously, but for certain things, processing data like we do is just a better mousetrap.
Which brings us to our last point amidst all this conversation about data and algorithms. I think one of our key learnings is that you still have to keep it human. So about 18 months ago, I started signing our newsletter with I Love You. It goes out to about 225,000 folks. At least right now, that's not something a rational machine is going to do, and hopefully at least not for a bit.
I'm Matthew Wong.
And I'm Anand Sanwal. Today we talk to you about how to tell a compelling story using data.